Welcome back to the deep dive. You know, when we think about the Roman Empire, its power, its sheer longevity, we often jump straight to the legions, maybe the law code.
Standard stuff, yeah.
But there's this fantastic quote from Dionysius of Halicarnassus, and he really nails it. He says, "The extraordinary greatness of the Roman Empire manifests itself above all in three things: the aqueducts, the paved roads, and the construction of the drains."
Infrastructure.
Yeah.
It sounds mundane, but he's absolutely right. The scale was, well, gargantuan.
Gargantuan is the word. We're talking about, what, 29 major military highways just radiating out from Rome itself?
Exactly, and that was just the core.
Yeah.
It fed into this immense network, over 400,000 kilometers across the empire. That's 250,000 miles, spanning 113 provinces.
250,000 miles. And the really critical part, I think, is that over 80,500 kilometers, that wasn't just packed earth. It was properly stone paved.
Think about that number. 80,500 kilometers paved.
To give you some perspective, that's more than double the entire modern U.S. interstate highway system, built largely by hand.
It's monumental. And that's really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To look at the Viae Romani, the Roman roads, but not just the stones themselves.
Right. We need to understand the whole integrated system.
Yeah, the system that allowed armies, officials, messages, trade goods, everything to move overland. This network was, it was absolutely fundamental to holding the Roman state together for centuries.
Okay, so let's unpack that system, because the real genius wasn't just piling stones, it was the legal structure behind it all. It goes way back.
It does. Right back to the laws of the 12 tables, around 450 BC. They were already thinking about this.
And they were specific. They mandated road widths, 8 Roman feet straight, and double that on curves?
Yeah, about 2.37 meters straight.
Yeah.
They literally wrote into law the space needed for, wagons or chariots to pass safely.
That's foresight. But you mentioned this legal concept, a servetus. That sounds important.
Oh, it's crucial. It basically means liability. The right to use a road, or even the obligation for a road to be on someone's land, wasn't just a casual agreement.
So it wasn't like, yeah, sure, you can cross my field this harvest.
No, it was a legal burden attached to the land itself.
Yeah.
Permanent.
Yeah.
You, as the landowner, couldn't just block it off or tear it up because it was inconvenient.
I see. So that permanence allows for standardization across vast territories.
Exactly. And the jurists, like Ulpian, they classified these roads very clearly. 3 main types. First, you've got the big ones, the via publicae.
The public roads. The main arteries.
Right, often called militaires because the army often built them initially. These were constructed, maintained, everything at public expense, state-funded, and often named after the official, the censor, who commissioned them.
Like the Via Appia, Via Flaminia, those famous names.
Those are the ones. The land itself was considered state property.
Okay, so those are the Roman interstates, basically. What else was there?
Then you had the Via Privatae, private roads, sometimes called rusticae, country roads.
So leading to a farm or an estate.
Precisely. Built by individuals originally. But, and this is interesting, the builder could choose to dedicate it for public use. So a private road could become a public connector.
Linking local areas back to the main grid. Makes sense. And the third type?
The viae vicinales. These were the local, village, or district roads, knitting communities together. And this is where the funding mechanism gets really clever.
Okay, I was wondering about that. If they're local, who pays for the upkeep? Not Rome Central, surely.
Definitely not. Maintenance fell squarely on the local magistrates, the magistri pagorum.
The village officials.
Yes, and they had the power to compel the local landowners, the people whose property the road bordered or crossed.
Uh-oh. Compel them how?
Either provide the labor, directly send workers out to fix the road, or pay up for the repairs.
So you were essentially taxed in labor or cash for the road running past your farm.
Pretty much. It sounds like a burden, and it was, but think about it.
Yeah.
It meant the entire empire, right down to the smallest village, had a direct stake in keeping the network functional.
That's actually quite brilliant. Decentralized maintenance costs.
It's classic Roman pragmatism. The genius wasn't just the engineering, it was making the system sustainable legally and financially. Even at the top, initial construction might be military via munire, literally to fortify a way.
But the long-term funding was handled differently. You mentioned commissioners.
Yes, the curators virum. They were specifically appointed to oversee fundraising and maintenance for the major roads. But sometimes, the expectation, especially for very high officials like censors, was that they'd fund major repairs sua pecunia.
With their own money.
With their own money. As a matter of civic duty and let's be honest, political prestige. It shows how vital these roads were considered.
Wow. And they even worried about traffic jams, that Lex Julia Municipalis.
Oh yeah, incredible. Restricting heavy commercial carts inside Rome, and even within a mile of the walls, to nighttime hours only.
They were tackling urban congestion 2,000 years ago.
It shows they understood the whole system, right down to the choke points. A great road isn't much use if the city entrance is gridlocked all day. It's early logistics planning.
Okay, so we've got the laws, the funding, the classifications. Let's get our hands dirty, metaphorically speaking. Let's talk engineering. This is why they lasted.
This is the sexy part, right? The actual construction. And yeah, there were different types based on materials.
You mentioned 3.
Right. You had the really basic ones, via terrena, just leveled earth, maybe okay for temporary use or very light traffic.
Like a dirt track.
Exactly. Then a step up was the Via Glariata earthen road, but surfaced with gravel. Better drainage, more durable.
But the one we picture, the icon, is the Via Munita.
That's the one. The built, paved road. The engineering here is essentially the same as building high-quality pavement in a city, just stretched out for miles and miles.
And looking at cross-sections, it's not just one layer. It's like a layer cake of engineering. Walk us through it. How did they build something to last millennia?
Systematically. Very systematically. It starts with digging down the fossa, the ditch, often quite deep, several feet, sometimes right down to solid bedrock if possible. Get a stable base.
Foundation first. Makes sense.
Then you build up. First layer, the statumen. This is a foundation of flat stones, packed tightly, often set in cement or mortar. This is your solid bed.
Okay, stone base. Then comes concrete. I see 2 layers listed usually.
Yeah, 2 distinct concrete layers, and they serve different functions. Above the statumen came the rudis. This was a thick layer, maybe 9 inches or so. Coarse concrete rubble, broken stones, mixed with cement. Its job was basically mass and stability.
The heavy lifting layer.
Kinda, yeah. But then on top of the rudis came the nucleus. This was finer concrete, maybe using gravel, sand, cement, sometimes even crushed pottery or tile mixed in. It provided a smoother, very compact and level surface.
So the nucleus is like the perfectly smooth base needed for the final surface.
Exactly. You need that fine, level bed to properly seat the top layer.
Which is the summa crista, the visible part.
Precisely. The top course. These were the large, tightly fitted paving stones, often polygonal basalt or limestone blocks, sometimes rectangular, laid incredibly tightly, often without mortar between them. Just precision fitting.
And critically, they weren't laid flat across, were they? There was a specific shape.
Absolutely essential. The summa crusta was cambered, crowned in the middle, sloping slightly down to the edges.
For drainage.
100% for drainage. Water runs off immediately into ditches built alongside the road. Standing water is the enemy of any road base. If water gets down into the statumen, especially in freezing climates, it destroys the road from below. That camber is key to their longevity.
It's just layers upon layers of smart engineering. And then there's the famous Roman straightness. They didn't seem to like curves much.
Not if they could help it. They prized the shortest distance. Their surveyors were brilliant. They'd aim for a point miles away and just go straight for it, cutting through hills, filling in valleys.
But that must have created some wickedly steep slopes.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking gradients of 10, 12%, being pretty normal in hilly areas. And in really mountainous country, you could see 15, even 20%.
Oof. Tough for heavy carts, I imagine.
Very tough, which is why sometimes, centuries later, engineers building alongside an old Roman road would opt for a longer, winding route with gentler slopes, even if the Roman line was still visible right next to it. Practicality eventually won out over absolute straightness for heavy traffic.
And they didn't stop at hills, rivers, marshes.
There's Pontus, beautiful, sturdy stone arch bridges, often using that amazing Roman concrete that could set underwater, and marshes. They built causeways. Massive raised embankments, sometimes 5 feet high or more, built up with stone and earth fill, just lifting the road right over the swamp. They tackled every obstacle.
Incredible. Okay, let's shift perspective. Imagine you're actually on one of these roads, an official maybe, or a merchant. How do you even navigate this huge network?
Well, the Romans loved standardization. The key navigational aid was the niliarium, the milestone.
The mile marker.
Exactly. A cylindrical stone column set up every Roman mile milia passum 1,000 paces. It would typically state the distance, usually to Rome or the next major provincial city.
And wasn't there one ultimate milestone in Rome itself? The origin point.
The legendary Miliarium Aureum, the golden milestone, set up by Augustus himself in the Forum. Supposedly listed distances to major cities across the empire. All roads literally led to Rome. And this was the symbolic 0 point.
But practical navigation, you couldn't just whip out a map like we do today, right? Maps were rare.
Extremely rare and very expensive. Not something the average traveler would have. What they used instead was an itinerarium.
An itinerary, like a list.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
In its simplest form, just a written list. City A to City B, distance X. City B to City C, distance Y. Compiled onto a scroll. Practical, if not visual.
And these evolved.
They did. Into things like the Tabula Peutingeriana, which is amazing. It survives today. It's a schematic map, like a medieval subway map. Totally distorted geographically, but brilliant for route planning. It shows connections, distances, major stops. Much more useful for a traveler than a realistic map back then.
Right, you just need to know the next town and how far. What about getting around? What were people using on these roads?
Depends on who you were and what you were carrying. For officials, or wealthier travelers, the rayeta was common. A sturdy, four-wheeled coach. Could carry several people and a decent amount of luggage, maybe up to 328 kilos, the sources suggest.
So the Roman minivan, maybe?
Maybe, yeah. Probably the main vehicle for comfortable long-distance travel. Lighter, faster options included the carus, often a two-wheeled chariot like a biga.
And speed. How fast could you actually travel?
With something like a rayeta or carus, changing horses regularly, you could probably average 40 to 50 kilometers a day. Maybe more for urgent imperial messages.
That's pretty good for the ancient world.
It's decent, yeah. Pedestrians, obviously slower, maybe 20, 25 kilometers a day. And heavy freight on the big solid-wheeled carts called plastrum, much slower.
To maintain those speeds, especially for government business, they needed more than just good roads. They needed support infrastructure. The cursus publicus.
Ah, yes, the public post or imperial postal service. An absolutely vital administrative tool. It was an organized system of support specifically for state officials and couriers.
So how did it work? Like stops along the way?
Exactly. They established mansions. These were official way stations, essentially government-run inns or villas, spaced roughly every 25 to 30 kilometers along the major routes.
A day's travel apart, roughly.
Pretty much. But you couldn't just show up. You needed an official warrant, a diploma, a passport, basically, to prove you were entitled to use the state facilities, lodging, food, fresh horses.
So guaranteed, safe, standardized stops for officials. What about everyone else? The merchants, soldiers on leave, regular folks?
They had to rely on private inns, the kapane, often located near the official mansions, trying to capture the spillover traffic.
And these were less luxurious.
Often, yes. The sources tend to describe them as somewhat disreputable, maybe rough, maybe you'd have bad food, bad wine, risk getting robbed, your typical roadside inn gamble, ancient style.
Sounds familiar. But you mentioned changing horses. Just getting a fresh horse wasn't enough, was it? Vehicles break down, animals get injured.
And that's where the other crucial element of the cursus publicus comes in, the mutationes, the changing stations.
Okay, different from the mansions.
Yes. These were placed more frequently, maybe every 20, 30 kilometers, sometimes even closer. Their sole purpose was logistical support for transport.
Like a pit stop.
Exactly like a pit stop. You'd get fresh draft animals, horses, mules, oxen. But crucially, they also had specialists on hand. Wheelwrights, cartwrights to fix vehicles, and equerri medici.
Horse doctors, veterinarians.
Precisely. Vets specializing in transport animals. This whole system rode mansio mutatio, allowed for incredible efficiency when needed.
Any examples of that speed?
There's a famous account of Emperor Tiberius. He apparently traveled 296 kilometers, that's about 184 miles, in just 24 hours to reach his dying brother, Drusus, in Germany, using this exact relay system of changing horses and chariots at the mutations.
Wow. Nearly 8 miles an hour average for 24 hours straight. That's astonishing for that era. That really shows the power of the integrated system.
It really does. It wasn't just about the road itself.
So when we think about these specific roads, the Via Appia, the Queen of Roads in Italy, or the Via Flaminia cutting across the peninsula, or even something like the Via Egnatia, this massive highway connecting the Adriatic all the way to Byzantium.
Major arteries of the empire.
What we're seeing isn't just engineering, it's a statement. A political commitment to connectivity, to standardization on a scale the world had never seen before.
Absolutely. And that, I think, is the ultimate takeaway. The sheer political will, the administrative genius, required not just to build, but to sustain this vast, complex, standardized infrastructure for centuries.
Yeah.
That's the real marvel.
Mandating construction standards, yes, but also mandating who paid, right down to the local farmer for his stretch of Via Vicinale.
It became the blueprint. Even after the Western Empire fell, those roads and the idea of that kind of centrally supported network persisted and influence road building for centuries more.
Which brings us to a final thought for you, our listener. Considering those meticulous standards, the direct financial and labor burdens placed on Roman citizens and officials, the strict traffic laws they enforced, all to build and maintain this stone network. What trade-offs are we making today for the speed and seeming ubiquity of our modern global logistics? When we complain about a pothole or a toll fee, are we perhaps overlooking the deeper question of who really bears the long-term cost of connection and convenience in our own time?
Something to think about next time you're stuck in traffic.
Definitely something to chew on.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're looking way up, about 240,000 miles away actually. There's this new rush back to the moon. Global players, private companies. Everyone's gearing up.
It's definitely heating up.
But it raises this huge question. Who actually owns the moon? I mean, the dust, the rocks, potential water ice, that helium-3 everyone talks about.
Right, who owns the resources? It's fundamentally a question of property rights in a place with no precedent.
Exactly. It feels like a new gold rush. And the irony is pretty thick here, because the world actually tried decades ago to write the rule book for this exact moment.
They did, and that effort largely failed to get traction where it mattered most.
Which is fascinating. So our mission today is a deep dive into that specific attempt, the 1979 agreement governing the activities of states on the moon and other celestial bodies.
Yeah.
Most people just call it the Moon Treaty.
Tinsler, yeah.
We want to unpack its, really idealistic goals, but also understand why it's now pretty much disregarded, often just called, quote, a failed attempt at constraining free enterprise.
That summary captures the prevailing view, certainly among the major spacefaring nations today.
Okay, so let's get the basics down first, just the facts.
Sure. So the treaty text was finalized and opened for signature in late 1979, December 18th, to be precise.
But it didn't just switch on then, right?
No, it had a clause. It needed 5 countries to formally ratify it before it actually entered into force. That took a while.
How long?
Until July 11th, 1984, so almost 5 years later.
Okay, and how many countries are actually party to it now, like as of 2024?
Still very few. As of May this year, only 17 states are parties.
17?
17, that sounds low, especially for a UN treaty about the moon.
It is extremely low, especially when you consider who isn't on that list.
Okay, here's the kicker, I bet. The fact that it tells the whole story.
Pretty much. Here it is. 0 states that currently have the capability to launch their own human spaceflight missions have ratified the treaty.
0. So that means the U.S., Russia, China.
Not ratified. Wow. Okay. So the countries actually going to the moon or planning to send people soon, they're not bound by this treaty at all.
Correct. Which, immediately raises the question of its relevance in practical terms today. If the main actors aren't playing by those rules, what force do the rules really have?
It makes it seem almost like a historical document rather than active international law for the key players.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dig into why. Why this huge disconnect? Where did it start?
You've got to go back to the context. Before the Moon Treaty, the main space law was the 1967 Outer Space Treaty, a landmark agreement.
Right, the one that says no nukes in orbit, no planting flags and claiming sovereignty. The basics.
Exactly. It laid the foundation. But by the late 1970s, technology was advancing. People could see a future where space wasn't just about exploration, flags, and footprints, but about exploitation, using resources.
Mining, manufacturing, settlements.
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Potentially, yes. And there was a feeling, particularly among developing nations at the UN, that the 1967 treaty was maybe a bit too vague on resource rights. They needed something more specific.
So the Moon Treaty was supposed to be Outer Space Treaty 2.0, focused on resources.
In a way, yeah. It aimed to provide more detailed legal principles. Its core objective was really ambitious, to set up an international regime to manage lunar exploration and, crucially, the administration of its resources.
An international regime, that sounds bureaucratic, but also potentially very powerful.
It was meant to ensure the moon was used, and this is key, for the benefit of all states and all peoples, not just the ones who could afford the rockets.
Okay, that's the core philosophy then. Space is a global commons, a shared inheritance.
Precisely. The common heritage of mankind concept. The idea was that any wealth generated, say, from mining helium-3 wouldn't just belong to the miner, it should somehow benefit everyone, even nations with no space program.
That is radically different from how things work on Earth with resources.
Radically different, and very idealistic.
And when you look at the specific articles in the treaty, you see that idealism woven throughout, right?
Absolutely. It covers a lot of ground.
Like the military stuff. It flat out bans any military use. No weapons testing, no military bases, full stop.
Well, almost full stop. It does have a small carve-out allowing military personnel to be used, but only for peaceful scientific purposes.
Okay, fair enough. Astronauts often have military backgrounds. What else?
Environmental protection was big, too. It requires states to prevent contamination of the moon and other bodies.
So don't bring Earth germs up there.
Right. And just as importantly, prevent contamination of Earth from anything brought back. Think Andromeda strain, maybe.
Okay, good call. We don't want moon plagues. What about science?
Freedom of scientific research is guaranteed for everyone, no discrimination. But there's a telling phrase. It says, samples collected during research are hoped to be shared.
Hoped, not required.
Hoped. The softer touch there.
Yeah.
And it's very clear. Putting your lander or your rover down somewhere doesn't create any ownership rights over that territory. Use doesn't equal ownership.
That reinforces the 1967 treaty. No land grabs.
Definitely. They were trying to nail that down.
You know, reading through the source material, the thing that really jumped out at me, showing the sheer, maybe even naive, scope of their ambition, Article 5.3.
Ah, yes. The extraterrestrial life clause.
Right. It says state parties have to promptly inform the UN Secretary General, the public, and the international scientific community of any signs of alien life they discover.
It's quite something, isn't it? They're drafting procedures for first contact.
While simultaneously failing to agree on rules for, digging up rocks for profit. It just shows how theoretical the resource issue must have felt compared to, finding ET.
I think that's a fair assessment of the mindset, perhaps. But legally, the real core of the treaty, and honestly the source of its eventual failure to launch, politically speaking, is Article 11.
Article 11. Okay, what's in there?
This is where they drop the two concepts that became political poison for the major space powers. First, it explicitly applies the phrase, common heritage of mankind, to the moon and its resources.
Okay, that phrase again, we know where that leads.
And second, building on that, it bans national appropriation of lunar resources, not just the land, but the resources themselves. It says appropriation is forbidden, quote, by claim of sovereignty, by means of use or occupation, or by any other means.
Whoa, okay, wait, let's pause on that. By any other means. That sounds incredibly broad.
It is.
So if you can't appropriate resources by means of use, how can a company possibly justify spending billions to go mine ice, process it, and sell it as rocket fuel if they don't own the ice they just dug up?
And that right there is the fundamental conflict, the absolute sticking point that has plagued this treaty from day one.
The common heritage language implies, some kind of mandatory sharing of profits, centralized UN control over mining licenses.
That's how opponents interpreted it, yes. And the ban on appropriation just seemed completely incompatible with any kind of commercial venture. It's why the treaty is often called unfinished or imprecise.
Because it sets up this ideal, but doesn't explain how it works in practice.
Precisely. It actually doesn't ban commercial mining outright. It allows for resource exploitation. But, there's a huge but.
Always a but.
But only after this international regime, this set of rules and procedures for managing it has been established by the state parties.
Okay, so it's like saying, you can drive this car, but first, we all have to agree on the exact traffic laws, the licensing system, the insurance requirements, and how we'll share the gas money.
That's a pretty good analogy. Article 11, paragraph 5 specifically says the parties undertake to establish this regime as such exploitation is about to become feasible.
About to become feasible. So they knew it was coming, but they deferred figuring out the rules.
They did. They set up a condition precedent.
Yeah.
You can't start digging until we agree on how to share the spoils, essentially.
And let me guess. They never agreed.
Bingo. Multiple UN conferences tried. They held meetings, debates, but could never reach a consensus on what this international regime should actually look like. How would licensing work? How would benefits be shared? Total gridlock.
So the crucial mechanism was just missing, left completely undefined.
Which led to this bizarre situation. Even S. Neil Rosenthal, who was NASA's general counsel and the chief U.S. negotiator for the Moon Treaty.
The guy who helped write it.
That guy. Years later, in 2018, he essentially said, look, maybe we should just wait to define the rules until resource exploitation is actually feasible. Let's kick the can down the road.
Wait a minute. That seems backward. If you wait until it's already feasible, doesn't that mean the countries or companies who can do it will just start doing it under their own rules?
Many legal scholars would say yes, absolutely.
Doesn't that completely undermine the whole common heritage principle? You're basically letting the pioneers set the terms.
It arguably does. That delay, that failure to define the regime, created a vacuum. And into that vacuum stepped private companies and national interests demanding regulatory clarity, but on their terms.
Not based on global sharing, but on enabling investment.
Right. There was this quote from a lawyer summarizing the challenge. The regime needed to somehow prevent a single company from getting a monopoly, while also avoiding the socialization of the moon.
A tricky balancing act. Maybe impossible in the political climate?
It certainly proved impossible to agree upon at the international level back then.
Which leads us right into the opposition, especially in the U.S., that basically stopped the treaty in its tracks from the start.
Yeah, there was significant and ultimately successful lobbying against U.S. ratification. Groups like the L5 Society were very active.
And their main argument was?
Fundamentally, that the Moon Treaty was anti-free enterprise, anti-private property rights, that the common heritage language and the undefined international regime would stifle innovation, kill any incentive for private investment, and basically hand control over to some inefficient UN bureaucracy.
The socialization of the moon fear.
Exactly. The core economic argument was, why would any company spend billions on a lunar mining operation if they didn't have clear rights to own and sell what they extracted? The uncertainty was a deal breaker.
So this sentiment, this pushback, led to some alternative ideas, right? Like maybe we don't need to claim the land itself.
Right. People like Lee Ratner proposed a different approach. Forget claiming sovereignty over the territory. The 1967 treaty already bans that anyway. Focus instead on securing the exclusive right to use or exploit the resources you extract.
Ah, so it's like fishing rights in international waters.
That's the common analogy, yeah. You don't own the patch of ocean where you catch the fish, but once the fish are in your boat, they're yours. Legally, yours to sell.
So apply that to the moon. You don't own the crater you're mining in, but the water ice you dig up and put in your tanker truck, that's your property.
That was the alternative legal theory being floated. Treat the extracted resource as property, thereby sidestepping the treaty's ban on appropriating the resources in place.
Clever, but still fundamentally different from the Moon Treaty's vision.
Completely different. And because the international community couldn't agree on the Moon Treaty's regime, and because private companies were starting to seriously plan lunar missions and demanding legal certainty,
the nations started taking matters into their own hands.
Precisely. We saw a major shift towards national legislation. The first big move, the one that really signaled the changing winds, was the U.S. in 2015.
What happened then?
Congress passed the U.S. Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act. Title IV of that act specifically grants U.S. citizens rights to possess, own, transport, use, and sell space resources they obtain.
Wow. So the U.S. just unilaterally declared that its companies can own resources mined in space.
Yes. It was a huge step, essentially creating a national framework because the international one envisioned by the Moon Treaty never materialized. It provided the regulatory clarity investors were seeking, at least under U.S. law.
That must have been like a starting gun for other countries.
It absolutely was. After the U.S. acted, you saw similar national laws pop up relatively quickly.
Right.
Luxembourg made a big push to become a hub for space mining companies and passed its own law.
Luxembourg. Interesting. Who else?
Japan followed suit. The UAE, China, India, Russia have also made statements or enacted policies supporting resource exploitation, though their specific legal frameworks might differ. The trend was clear. Major players were creating their own rules.
So everyone just decided to go their own way rather than wait for the UN.
It appears so. Now, it's really important to add here, many international law experts argue vigorously that these national laws are not consistent with the Moon Treaty.
Because the treaty bans appropriation, and these laws seem to allow it.
Exactly. They also argue it might conflict with customary international law that evolved from the Outer Space Treaty. So you have this growing legal conflict. National laws providing commercial certainty versus potentially conflicting international principles.
A real mess, a patchwork of competing regulations.
That's a good way to put it. And this conflict reached a kind of philosophical peak in 2020.
What happened in 2020?
Two things, really, driven by the U.S. First, the launch of the Artemis Accords.
Ah, the Accords. We hear a lot about them. They're not a treaty, right?
Yeah.
More like guidelines.
They're a series of bilateral agreements between the U.S. and other signatory nations, setting out principles for cooperation in lunar exploration, mostly based on the Outer Space Treaty. But they specifically include a section affirming that space resource extraction and utilization should be conducted under the Outer Space Treaty, implicitly endorsing the view that it's permissible.
So they're building a coalition around a framework that allows resource use, directly challenging the Moon Treaty's approach.
That seems to be the intent. And to make the point even clearer, around the same time the Accords were rolled out, the U.S. president issued an executive order.
What did it say?
It stated very explicitly that the United States does not view outer space as a global commons.
Wow, directly rejecting that core concept.
Directly. And it went on to call the Moon Agreement a failed attempt at constraining free enterprise.
Okay, so that's pretty unambiguous. The U.S. position is, Moon Treaty failed, space isn't a commons, let's move on with a system that supports commercial activity via the Artemis Accords.
That's the clear message. It frames the current reality. A push towards a non-universal, commercially oriented system, prioritizing investment and national interests over the Moon Treaty's ideal of global equitable sharing.
So if we step back now, what does this all mean for the legal landscape you need to navigate today? It sounds incredibly fragmented.
It is. You have this idealistic Moon Treaty, still technically law, but ratified by very few, and none of the major human spaceflight powers. You have a growing number of national laws authorizing mining, which might conflict with that treaty, and you have the Artemis Accords creating a separate competing framework based on bilateral agreements.
It's confusing. Can these different systems even coexist? Which brings up that really interesting case, Australia.
Yes, Australia is unique. They're one of the few countries that has signed and ratified both the Moon Treaty and the Artemis Accords.
How is that even possible? They seem philosophically opposed.
That's the million-dollar question everyone's asking. It forces a discussion. Is harmonization actually possible? Can you somehow reconcile the common heritage principle with the Accords' focus on commercial utilization under national supervision? Australia seems to think you can, or at least that they don't directly conflict yet.
Is there any proposed way to bridge this gap? To maybe revive the Moon Treaty spirit?
Well, the main idea that keeps coming up, the theoretical fix that proponents advocate for, is to finally create that missing piece. A definitive implementation agreement for the Moon Treaty.
The how-to guide they never wrote back in the 70s and 80s.
Exactly. Remember, the treaty itself allows exploitation once the regime is in place. An implementation agreement would be that regime. It would provide the detailed rules, how licenses are granted, environmental standards, safety zones, maybe even those benefit-sharing mechanisms.
So in theory, it could provide the regulatory clarity that companies want, but within the original common heritage framework.
That's the hope of its supporters. They believe it could address the treaty's shortcomings, make it more acceptable to major powers, and provide a truly international framework rather than the patchwork we have now. It would turn the aspirational principles into something concrete and operational.
But we come back to the same practical problem, don't we?
Yeah.
Getting international agreement on those details, especially the money part.
That's always been the hurdle. The belief, particularly strong in the U.S. and among commercial players, is that guaranteed rights to the economic benefits, the profits, are absolutely essential to justify the huge private investment needed for lunar missions.
And without clear rules guaranteeing that return on investment, whether from the Moon Treaty, IA, or the Artemis Accords companies, are hesitant.
They fear regulatory uncertainty. What if you spend billions setting up a mine and then the rules change? Or a competing claim arises under a different legal system? That lack of clarity is seen as the biggest blocker to large-scale private activity right now.
So it really boils down to a fight over profit and who gets to set the rules for making it.
Sadly, yes. The controversy over claims and mining rights for profit has largely dominated the discussion for decades now. It's sidelined many of the Moon Treaty's other important goals, like preventing conflict, ensuring scientific cooperation for all, protecting the environment.
The focus today isn't idealism. It's about regulatory certainty for wealth extraction.
That seems to be the dominant driver, yes.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. The core tension is crystal clear. We have the 1979 dream of the moon as the common heritage of all mankind, managed internationally for everyone's benefit.
A beautiful, idealistic vision.
Versus the current reality. National laws being passed, driven by commercial interests needing regulatory clarity, primarily focused on enabling private profit and coalescing around the U.S.-led Artemis Accords framework.
And the Moon Treaty itself, still on the books, but ratified mostly by nations without independent launch capabilities. It stands as this powerful, almost poignant reminder of how incredibly difficult it is to get global consensus when potentially vast resources and profits are at stake.
Which leaves us with a really important question for the future, doesn't it?
I think it does. Here's something for you to mull over. If the real key to unlocking space development isn't necessarily ideological agreement on common heritage, but simply achieving regulatory clarity, clear rules of the road, does pursuing that elusive implementation agreement for the Moon Treaty still offer the best path forward? Could it balance commercial development with benefits for all humanity?
Or has that ship sailed? Are the Artemis Accords, with their focus on national frameworks and bilateral deals, already too far ahead? Is that profit-driven, nationally focused model simply the inevitable future for how we manage resources off Earth? Which path ultimately leads to orderly, safe, and maybe even sustainable use of space in the long run?
That's the multi-billion, maybe trillion-dollar question. Which framework will define the next 100 years in space?
Something to think about. Thank you for sharing your sources for this deep dive. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive. Okay, so when we think about movies, I mean, it's almost impossible not to think about Hollywood, right? It's the global face of American film, a huge cultural force for, what, over a century now?
Absolutely. It's shaped so much of global entertainment, and, well, we all watch the movies, obviously, but you wanted to go deeper, really get into the hidden backstory, how the business itself changed so dramatically over time.
Yeah, and where it stands now, because there's all this talk about a crisis, an existential one even.
Exactly. And that's what our sources let us dig into today. We're aiming to track, the whole journey from these really quite humble, almost desperate beginnings back east.
Right, not even in California initially.
Not at all. Through that whole era of the big studios controlling everything, the studio system.
The golden age.
That's the one. And then right up to today's, frankly, pretty intense battle between what people call cinema, film as art, and this idea of content, just stuff to fill the streaming queue.
It's a huge arc. And you mentioned starting back east.
Yeah.
Let's kick off with that surprising fact you flagged. Hollywood wasn't always L.A.
Nope. Not even close initially. The very first commercial showing of a motion picture, that was actually New York City, way back in 1894, using Edison's kinetoscope.
Edison, okay, so he's central from the very beginning.
Oh, completely. And for a while, the capital of American filmmaking, if you can believe it, was Fort Lee, New Jersey.
New Jersey. Not quite as glamorous sounding, is it?
Doesn't have the same ring, no.
Huh.
But Edison's famous studio, the Black Maria, the first purpose-built movie studio, was in West Orange, New Jersey. And crucially, he owned the key patents.
The patents for the camera and the projector, the kinetoscope and kinetograph.
Yeah. He basically held the keys to the kingdom, technologically speaking.
Okay, so if the tech, the studios, everything starts in New Jersey, why on earth did everyone pack up and move 3,000 miles away to California? I mean, I know the weather's nice, but was it just sunshine?
The weather was definitely a factor. Year-round filming, reliable sun, that's a big plus compared to the East Coast winters. But honestly, that was secondary.
Secondary to what?
Escaping Thomas Edison. Or, more accurately, escaping his lawyers and his enforcement agents.
Enforcement agents. It sounds like the mob.
Well, maybe not that dramatic, but Edison formed something called the Motion Picture Patents Company, the MPPC, often just called the Trust. It was a consortium that pooled all the major patents.
So a monopoly, basically.
Pretty much. If you wanted to make a movie, legally, you had to license the equipment from the trust, pay hefty fees. If you didn't, or if you used rival equipment, they'd sue you. They'd send people to physically seize your cameras on set.
Wow. Okay, so making movies outside their system was incredibly risky.
Hugely risky. So filmmakers started looking for somewhere far away, somewhere the trust's agents couldn't easily reach them, somewhere less legally constrained.
So the Great Migration West wasn't really about chasing a dream of Hollywood glamour. It was about escaping a patent war.
Fundamentally, yes. Artistic freedom came later. The initial driver was economic survival and frankly, avoiding litigation. Los Angeles offered that distance. It offered great weather, diverse landscapes nearby mountains, deserts, ocean.
All good for different movie scenes.
Exactly. And maybe the clincher. It was only about 90 miles from the Mexican border.
A quick escape route.
Precisely. If word came that Edison's guys were on their way, you could literally pack up your cameras, head south, and be outside of U.S. jurisdiction pretty quickly. That geographical safety net was huge.
That's incredible. So that combination, distance, weather, locations, and the border escape hatch, that's what built Hollywood.
That's what cemented the move. Now, it wasn't instantaneous. D.W. Griffith shot a film called In Old California, actually in Hollywood, back in 1910. But the real consolidation, the point where L.A. became undeniably dominant, that was really solidified by the 1930s.
And that leads us right into what people call the Golden Age, or classical Hollywood cinema. Roughly, what, 1913 to the early 60s?
That's the general time frame, yeah. And this era was shaped by really two massive developments. First, the arrival of synchronized sound.
The Jazz Singer, 1927. The talkies arrived.
Changed everything overnight, practically. And second, the consolidation of the economic model that defined the era. The studio system.
Right, the studio system. We hear that term a lot.
Yeah.
What did it actually entail?
It meant total control. Think vertical integration on a massive scale. The big five studios, MGM, Paramount, RKO, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox.
The household names?
Exactly. They didn't just make the movies. They owned the production facilities, the giant studio lots, the cameras, the light. They owned the talent. Actors, directors, writers were under long-term exclusive contracts.
Like property, almost.
In a business sense, yes. And they owned the distribution networks, the system for getting the film prints physically shipped around the country. And crucially,
they owned the movie theaters themselves.
Bingo. Production, distribution, and exhibition. They controlled the entire chain, from the initial idea right down to the popcorn stand in your local cinema.
Owning the theaters seems like the ultimate power move. They could guarantee their own films got shown, right? Squeeze out competitors.
Absolutely. They used practices like block booking. If an independent theater owner wanted to show, say, the big new Clark Gable movie from MGM.
Which they obviously did.
Right. MGM could say, fine, you can have it, but you also have to take these 5 other B movies or shorts that we need to get rid of. The theater owner had no choice but to take the whole block.
So they forced theaters to show their lesser films just to get the hits.
Exactly. And blind bidding, where theaters had to bid on films often without even seeing them first, just based on the stars or the genre. It guaranteed revenue for the studios, regardless of quality sometimes.
And this system led to those really distinct studio styles we associate with the era, right? Like MGM's glossy musicals and dramas.
Yeah, MGM bragged about having more stars than there are in heaven. Warner Brothers became known for gritty gangster films and social dramas. Paramount had a more European, sophisticated flair sometimes. Each studio cultivated a brand.
But that much control? It wasn't just economic, was it? There was moral control, too. The Hays Code.
Ah, yes. The production code, usually called the Hays Code after Will H. Hays, who oversaw it. It was drafted in 1930, but the studios didn't take it that seriously at first.
What changed?
Pressure, primarily from religious groups like the Catholic Legion of Decency, who were horrified by some of the racier, more violent pre-code films of the early 30s. They threatened nationwide boycotts.
And boycotts mean lost money.
Big money. So starting in 1934, the studios agreed to give the Production Code Administration, run by Joseph Breen, real teeth. From then on, pretty much every film released by a major studio had to get a seal of approval.
And if you didn't?
If you dared to release a film without that seal, a massive fine, $25,000.
Doesn't sound huge today, maybe.
But in 1934, money. That $25,000 is equivalent to nearly $500,000 today.
Okay, wow. That's not a fine, that's a death sentence for a film's budget.
Exactly. It ensured near total compliance. The code dictated everything crime couldn't pay. Villains had to be punished. Explicit sex or violence was out. Even certain words were forbidden. It shaped the content of American movies for decades.
So you have this incredibly powerful, vertically integrated system controlling production, distribution, exhibition, and content through the code. It seems untouchable. What brought it down?
The government. Specifically, the Department of Justice. They saw this whole setup, especially the studios owning the theaters and block booking, as a clear violation of antitrust laws.
Like any other monopoly controlling a market unfairly.
Precisely. It culminated in a landmark Supreme Court case, United States v. Paramount Pictures, Inc. The decision came down in 1948.
And the verdict?
The court agreed with the government. They ruled that the studios owning the theaters and engaging in practices like block booking was an illegal restraint of trade under the Sherman Antitrust Act.
So what was the consequence? They had to sell the theaters.
That was the big one. The studios were forced to divest themselves of their theater chains. They had to choose. Either make and distribute movies or exhibit them. They couldn't do both anymore.
That must have completely shattered their business model.
Fundamentally.
Wow.
It broke the vertical integration. Suddenly, their guaranteed revenue stream from their own theaters was gone. They had to compete to get their films booked into theaters, including the ones they used to own.
And it also ended the old long-term contract system for stars.
It was a major blow to it, yeah. Without the guaranteed income from theaters, studios couldn't afford to keep massive stables of stars under exclusive contract quite the same way. Power started shifting towards the talent, towards agents. It led to the rise of independent production packages. A director, a star, a script coming together for one specific film rather than being assigned by the studio machine.
Interesting. So the antitrust case, by breaking the monopoly, actually opened the door for more creative freedom in a way.
It definitely changed the equation. Before 1948, studios could rely on volume and guaranteed exhibition. After 1948, each film became more of an individual gamble. They had to focus more on quality, on unique stories, on things that would actually draw audiences into competing theaters.
And you mentioned this earlier, this shift, this need to take risks on individual films is maybe what allowed some classics to get made, like Citizen Kane.
That's a fascinating point raised in the sources, yeah. Citizen Kane, although made before the final Paramount decision, was exactly the kind of risky, medium-budget, artistically ambitious film with a non-traditional structure that the old guaranteed revenue system wasn't really built for. RKO took a gamble on Orson Welles.
And it famously flopped initially, right?
It did. It lost money. But the post-Paramount environment, arguably, created more space for those kinds of necessary risks. Studios couldn't just churn out predictable programmers quite as easily. They had to occasionally bet on vision, on a good script, even with less established stars, because quality started to matter more in a competitive market.
So the collapse of the old system paves the way for what came next, New Hollywood.
Exactly. The late 60s and 70s saw the rise of New Hollywood. This was the era of the film school generation directors like Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, George Lucas, Steven Spielberg.
The movie brats.
That's them. They grew up watching and studying the classics, they revered film history, but they also wanted to break the old molds. They brought a new energy, often a more personal or auteur-driven style.
And critically, they also learned how to make huge amounts of money.
Oh, absolutely. This era quickly transitioned into the age of the modern blockbuster, kicked off by things like Jaws in '75 and then Star Wars in '77. These films weren't just hits, they were cultural phenomena. They changed the scale of success, the marketing, the focus on sequels and franchises.
Bigger budgets, bigger spectacle, bigger audiences needed, which I guess pushed technological innovation too.
Definitely. As the blockbuster mentality took hold through the 80s and into the 90s, there was a constant push for bigger, better, louder experiences to justify the ticket price. That's where we see major leaps like digital sound.
Dolby Digital.
Right. Debuting widely with films like Batman Returns in '92, suddenly sound was clearer, more immersive. And then the really game-changing stuff. Computer-generated imagery, CGI.
Terminator 2 and the liquid metal T-1000.
Unforgettable, 1991. And then just 2 years later, Jurassic Park in '93. Seeing those dinosaurs, it felt like magic. It completely changed what was possible on screen. Spectacle became paramount.
So blockbusters, CGI, global audiences. This all leads us towards the current moment, doesn't it? And this tension you mentioned earlier between cinema and content.
It really sets the stage perfectly, because the drive for global spectacle, combined with huge technological shifts in distribution, namely the internet and streaming, has brought us to what many see as a crisis point.
The rise of Netflix, Disney Plus, carry Amazon Prime Video, HBO Max. They dominate how we watch things now.
And their business model is fundamentally different from the old studio or even the theatrical blockbuster model. They're not primarily selling individual movie tickets, they're selling subscriptions.
So they need a constant stream of stuff to keep people subscribed. Volume matters.
Volume, recognizable stars, easy-to-market concepts, existing intellectual property, IP, these things become incredibly valuable in a subscription world. And this trend, treating films primarily as content to fill a platform, well, it's drawing intense criticism from many traditional filmmakers.
Yeah, the quotes are pretty stark. Martin Scorsese, what did he say? Cinema is being
systematically devalued, sidelined, demeaned, and reduced to its lowest common denominator, content. He finds the relentless focus purely on box office or streaming metrics repulsive.
That's strong language from arguably America's greatest living director.
It is, and he's not alone. Quentin Tarantino has called the current era potentially one of the worst in Hollywood history in terms of the movies actually getting made and released theatrically.
Wow. Worst ever.
His opinion, but it reflects a deep frustration. And Charlie Kaufman, the writer of films like Being John Malkovich and Eternal Sunshine, he put it even more bluntly. He said, essentially, the only thing that makes money is garbage.
Ouch. Are they just being, resistant to change? Or is there something specific they're pointing to?
I think they're pointing to a shift in priorities driven by the economics. Look at some examples the sources mention. Red Notice, that big Netflix movie with Dwayne Johnson, Gal Gadot, Ryan Reynolds, huge budget, around $200 million.
Huge stars.
Massive stars. And it got enormous viewing numbers on Netflix. But critics widely panned it. One described it as feeling like it was processed by a machine, like an algorithm assembled it from popular plot points and star appeal, rather than coming from any artistic vision.
But for Netflix, maybe the viewing hours justified the cost, regardless of critical reception.
That seems to be the logic, yes.
Yeah.
It served its purpose as high-profile content. Or take Space Jam, A New Legacy.
The sequel with LeBron James.
Right. Heavily criticized as basically just a giant commercial for Warner Brothers' intellectual property library, all jammed into one movie. A lengthy infomercial for HBO Max, one critic called it. IP for the sake of IP.
So the argument is that the pressure to create globally appealing, easily marketable content, often based on existing brands, is squeezing out riskier, more original, maybe more artistic films.
That's the core of the criticism. The financial incentive structure, especially in streaming but also influencing theatrical releases, seems to favor safe bets, sequels, remakes, adaptations of known IP over original stories or challenging dramas.
And this focus on global markets brings in other complications too, right? Like issues of representation and, censorship.
Absolutely. Hollywood is global Hollywood now. The international box office is often more important than the domestic take for big blockbusters. This has huge implications.
We'll talk representation first. The celluloid ceiling, what are the numbers there?
Well, the data evolves, and there has been progress, let's be clear. But historically and sometimes persistently, the numbers aren't great. The sources cited a 2012 study, for instance.
Okay, a decade ago, but gives a baseline.
Right. In 2012, among the top 250 grossing films, only 9% of directors were women. Only 15% of writers were women. When certain voices are consistently underrepresented behind the camera, it inevitably impacts the kinds of stories being told and the perspectives being shown on camera.
And there's the pay gap issue, too.
Yes, particularly noted for older actresses compared to their male counterparts. Even established female stars often face a significant disparity in pay compared to male stars of similar age and stature. It's a persistent equity issue.
Okay, so internal representation is one angle.
Yeah.
What about the external pressures from being global Hollywood? You mentioned censorship.
Yeah, this is a really complex area because Hollywood relies so heavily on access to international markets, especially massive ones like China. There's often immense pressure to shape the content of films to avoid offending foreign governments or cultural sensitivities.
So self-censorship, basically, to guarantee access.
It often operates that way, yes. It's a market access decision. The sources mention the historical example of studios in the 1930s downplaying or avoiding negative depictions of Nazis.
Seriously, even in the 30s?
Yes, because Germany was an important market, and they didn't want their films banned there. It's business calculation overriding other concerns.
And more recently, the focus has been on China.
China's become a huge factor. Its box office is massive. So there are documented cases where studios have altered films to appease Chinese censors. The example given was the remake of Red Dawn.
Right. The original was about Soviets invading. The remake.
The villains were initially written and filmed as Chinese, but during post-production, facing the potential loss of the entire Chinese market, the filmmakers digitally altered flags and symbols and redubbed dialogue to make the invaders North Korean instead.
Wow. Just swapped out the antagonist to maintain market access.
It's a stark example of how global economic pressures can directly influence the creative content of a Hollywood film.
Okay, so we've covered the business evolution, the creative tensions, the global pressures. What about the actual people who make these movies? The labor force. It's not a typical 9-to-5 job.
Not at all. That's a crucial piece often overlooked. Hollywood runs on a project-based, freelance economy for most of its workforce. The crews, the writers, many actors, even directors often go from gig to gig.
Feast or famine, kinda.
Very much so. And the work itself can be incredibly demanding. The sources mention the potential for grueling hours, 16, 17-hour days, aren't unheard of, especially during intense periods of shooting on location. It's high-pressure, deadline-driven work.
Which makes the unions incredibly important, I imagine.
Absolutely essential. Because most workers aren't permanent employees of one studio, the unions provide the stability and the safety net. You have IATC for the crews, the grips, the electricians, the costumers, camera operators.
The backbone of the production.
Definitely. Then SAG-AFTRA for actors and broadcasters, the DGA for directors, and the WGA for writers. These major guilds and unions negotiate industry-wide contracts.
With who? Who do they negotiate with?
They bargain collectively with an organization called the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, the AMPTP, which represents the major studios and production companies.
And what do these contracts cover?
Minimum wages, working conditions, safety standards. Crucially, they also provide portable health insurance and pension plans, which is vital in a freelance industry where you're constantly changing employers.
And we saw how powerful these unions can be with the recent strikes, right? The writers and actors.
Exactly. Those strikes highlighted key modern issues. A big one was residuals getting fair payment when films and shows are rerun on streaming services, where the old payment models don't really fit.
Because the viewing data is often hidden by the streamers.
Precisely. And the other huge issue was the threat of artificial intelligence. Writers worried about AI being used to generate scripts, actors worried about their digital likenesses being used without consent or compensation. The unions fought for and won significant protections in those areas. It shows how collective bargaining is adapting to these new technological and economic challenges.
Okay, so wrapping this all together, it's quite a journey. Hollywood starts almost accidentally as a way to dodge patent lawyers.
Right, a legal refuge that happened to have good weather.
Then it builds this incredibly powerful monopolistic studio system that controls everything, even morality via the Hays Code.
Until the government steps in and breaks up that vertical integration with the Paramount Decree.
Which maybe unintentionally creates a space for more creative risk-taking, leading into New Hollywood and the blockbuster era.
Driven by spectacle, global markets, and huge technological leaps like CGI.
And that brings us to today. This battle between artistic cinema and platform-filling content, complicated by global politics, censorship pressures, and ongoing labor fights over things like streaming residuals and AI.
It's a confluence of crises, really. The old models are under strain, the new models prioritize different things, and the very definition of what a movie is or should be seems up for grabs.
So what's the final thought you want to leave us with, reflecting on all this?
Well, think back to that moment after the Paramount decision. That period where the collapse of the old certainties forced studios to diversify, to take chances on things like Citizen Kane, that medium budget feature with a good script and relatively unknown actors. It was a risk, but a necessary one in that competitive landscape.
Okay.
So the question for you listening now is this. In today's Hollywood, dominated by the hunt for global tentpoles, pre-existing IP, and streaming metrics, can the system still afford to take those kinds of risks? The medium-sized, original, maybe challenging film.
Is there room for another Citizen Kane today?
Oh.
Or does the economic pressure for guaranteed, brand-driven content just make that too dangerous a gamble?
Exactly. What kind of artistic risk is truly left or even valued in an industry increasingly driven by algorithms, franchises, and the need to feed the beast of perpetual streaming growth? Something to definitely mull over next time you're scrolling through your options.